Hi guys, I'm Bethany New and this is the latest instalment of Talks to the Authors. I was chatting to, once again, Sid Hogan on his latest work, Ivan and the Night Marches. This is the second volume, so sit back, relax and enjoy. Your third book,
Yep.
what advice would you give to any writers, any new writers coming into the industry?
My main one, because I've been asked by writers as well that are just starting, is when I started writing my first books, I tried to do like the perfect first draft, thinking that's what you were supposed to do. And then I had to keep going back and then unreleasing it to change things because I wasn't happy with it. And now I would tell people, you can make your first draft as messy as possible. You don't have to, it doesn't even have to be coherent sentences at first.
Yeah.
Just if you've got the ideas in your head, write them all down. And then the editing and stuff for me is my favourite bit now. I love going back because once you've written the story, you know what the story is, so you can go back and write more or change things. So I would say that just write everything that's in your head. It doesn't have to be spell checked every word. You don't have to even be like correcting, the way you form sentences. It doesn't matter as long as you've got all your ideas down. So I'd say that don't try and get it all perfect first time round because there's plenty of time to go back and change everything.
The first draft is always like the hard one to write, isn't it? So how would you?
Yeah.
How did you write your first draft to like this book? Oh.
Well, it's all simple, so it's fair enough. With this one, because it's part 2 of the series, it was a lot easier to just sort of get through it because I already had the backstory for all the characters. It was already established and I knew what had happened in the last book. So I think it came out a lot better than as a first draft. But obviously I think I went back and I did like 4 run-throughs of it because I care about the story so much now that I already know how it is and how I want it to be, and I've got such a clear idea of it. But yeah, I think because it is a volume 2, it was a much easier run through like when I was writing it because I had such a big backstory. Obviously I did do a lot of editing, but I already had like the characters in my head, like I knew how they sound, how they speak. I already established that, so it was a lot easier to write this time round. But the first volume wasn't. It took significantly longer than this one did. I mean, this one took less than a year, but the first one was probably about 2 years. So, yeah, it was definitely easier this time, but that's just because it was the second one. So, yeah.
Was there a big gap between the first book of the series and your other book, Dear Dot? Was there a big gap in how when you were writing it, or were you writing it alongside each other?
Yeah, I was doing it alongside each other. Obviously, Dear Dot, I had 2 versions of it, and I kept switching between. But then when I was sort of towards the end of that, probably towards the end and then just before editing, I got the idea for this book, and I'd always wanted to write a vampire book because I love classic horror and like Bram Stoker and stuff. But it's difficult because it's all been done, and I didn't want to just do it for the sake of doing it. I wanted a story, so it sort of towards the end of Dear Dot, I got big inspiration for it. I can't remember. It might have even just been watching. I think I was watching Harry Potter, and because it's in the sense that I wanted to create a world that I love the idea of Azkaban and they're having their own prison, and that's where I got the inspiration for the prison in my book. Just little things like that, and that started forming a world in my head, and I think it was a big relief from writing Dear Dot because it's completely fictional, whereas obviously Dear Dot is fictional, but it's all based on real things, so you've got to be really careful with dates and events, and it's also very sad. So it was at the time it was nice to go to this completely fictional world while I was writing such a heavy book.
So when you got like Dear Dot and you got Ivan and the Night Marches, have you settled on a complete genre you like, or would you like to explore into more genres?
I think about that a lot because I've got loads of books that I've obviously when I say books, I've got stories that I've got written or that I've wrote drafts of that I wouldn't say fall under either of the genres that I've already got out. But I think historical fiction and gothic fiction are my favourites, and I think they're the ones that I'm best at because I've spent my whole life invested in both, not necessarily writing, but I've always, like I said, loved horror and classical horror and stuff. So since I was a kid, I've watched that stuff, and the same with historical fiction. I love history, and I've always read historical fiction books. So I think they're probably where I'd want to stay, but I'm definitely willing to, like, I've tried and I've got stories that I've written that I love, but I think I'm gonna do like a book of sad stories, because they're all sort of in the vein of like tragic romance, but they're not not all of them are necessarily under the historical fiction, but they're also not, because I think that when you start writing, you try and make novels, like you think I have to write a whole book, and I'm like, I've got all these stories, and I don't want to force myself to put things in them that don't need to be there when I think they're good enough. So I think eventually I'll put them all in one book, and then I'll do it like that.
When you're writing, what is your process to what comes first? So is it the plot or is it the characters? Do you have your characters like a character list and then the plot comes follow with the character? Just explain the process of when you're writing.
Yeah, I think the characters usually come first, and I have like a movie in my head, like where I can imagine these characters in certain scenarios. Especially because like I said, I watch lots of war films and stuff, so it's like my brain sort of goes into like random stories, and that's how I get characters like Data and stuff. But with Ivy of the Night Marches, it was the character and the world first. I didn't really have a plot. I didn't know what was going to happen. I had like the odd scene in my head where I think that'd be really cool, or like even just quotes that I did end up putting in the book that I could imagine, like conversations. That's why the first book's quite it's like in an interview form, like not really, like not all the way through, but when the character first comes into it, it is in a bit of an interview format, because a lot of it was just quotes that I had in my head. And I think I would love to be able to write scripts and stuff, because I love that aspect of writing books, the conversation. I think they're my best. I would do it best. So yeah, I'd say the characters definitely come first, and then the plot sort of comes naturally while I'm writing.
So this book, Ivan Night Marches, the second book in particular, explores the idea of forgiveness. Is there any idea, any events in your life that personally or professionally that inspired you to follow this idea of forgiveness?
Yeah, there's quite, because I think in the book sense, because there is, I often think about that, because I hear all the time, like, you forgive for yourself, it's not for anyone else. You know, it's like, you don't necessarily, because I always say that, I'm like, I don't feel like these people deserve forgiveness, but if I don't, for my sake, then I won't find peace. And I like that in this, these are characters and creatures that I don't think they don't care about that, and that's what the quote is. Forgiveness means nothing here. It literally means, in their language, it doesn't exist. It's not a word that exists, because the vampires, they don't have souls. They don't care about like, you can wrong them. They're not going to forgive. So I think it was quite therapeutic to be able to put a lot of my mixed feelings about forgiveness and whether or not I think people deserve it, and be able to just sort of put it in a world where it doesn't exist. And then in my real life, I have that peace because I've put it all in a book with people that don't necessarily they don't care about it. There's obviously humans in the book as well, and they have their own, like, they're trying to forgive the vampires, thinking that it's working and that they're forgiving it, and the vampires are forgiving them, but it's not it doesn't work like that. So yeah, I think for my sake it was very therapeutic to be able to put all my pain into these characters and then let them fight about it.
I know this is like going on completely off topic, but designing a cover, designing of how of cover for both your books, well, all
Yeah.
three of your books. How do you do that? What makes you find the perfect cover for your book? Because ultimately, when someone's looking for a bookstore, looking online, they look at the cover.
Yeah.
So how do you get the perfect person to pick up the cover of the book?
Well, for this series specifically, the War ones, I went through a couple of different covers for Dear Dot especially, but I had a very clear image in my head based on books that I'd read for War ones. But with the Vampire series, I love, for example, like John Ryland's Library, for example, they have a very gothic selection, and I like that you see, like, even in vampire films, the red cover with the black outline and stuff. I just thought, yeah, exactly, I thought it'd be perfect for it, and I did it with, I've got volume 1 here as well. I did it with the first one as well, not that you can really see it, but
yeah,
that's volume 1, and in volume 2 it's sort of obviously a bit different, but the same.
obviously I've got the paperback version, but I can tell you've got the hardback cover as well.
Yeah, I only came yesterday, so I'm flexing. But yeah, I think when I think of that kind of, like, if I went out looking for a book specifically on like traditional like vampire mythology, like in a fictional sense, obviously not like in a historical sense, that would be the kind of cover I'd look for, because it says it's not like Twilight, that kind of vampire, or even like Buffy, which I love. It's not that kind of vampire, it's like inspired by the classics. So that's what I tried to aim for with this. I was lucky because my tattoo artist designed the first one, and then with the second one I used not AI in the sense that I went and used it to make art. I just put the first cover in the AI and it made a second one. So it's all based off the original artwork that I used.
Yeah. So what part of Ivan and the Night Marchers was the most fun to write about? Which part did you really enjoy?
Ivan and Elizabeth's relationship probably, but also how it was definitely their relationship, because I'm writing volume 3 now, and it's like a history style book. That's how it's starting. So it's really looking into the characters' past because they're so old, but their relationship, because it's like because I don't want to take away from the fact, because a lot of the time in vampire films they have like a redemption where they're good for a bit, and I don't want that, because I want there to be like a very clear disconnect from humans and these creatures, otherwise it doesn't seem like it would work. But with their relationship, it's sort of everything that revolves around that, and then making sense of it and why they like each other, but they still want they're still brutal to everyone else. So I think because it's not just about them two being together, it's about how evil it made them and how it scares everyone around them. So yeah, that was definitely the most fun.
I was going to ask you if you was writing a third instalment to this series. Could you share with us a little bit of what you've been writing and what you're up to, or is that like literally top secret?
I'll give a little bit, because obviously this one it does end on a bit of a cliffhanger, so the next book will go into that, but the first half of the book is like a history, but like a profile on Ivan and Elizabeth. So it's her first, and then because obviously I don't even know if I wrote how old they are in the book. They talk about like hundreds and hundreds of years old, so it's interesting to be able to write not just what's happening now, but going back hundreds and hundreds of years and being able to write through history. So that's pretty much what it is, and then the rest of the story will be carrying on from this one.
Without giving too much away, you don't want to spoil the third book for you. So what character of the Ivan and Night Marcher series do you particularly relate to the most?
That's probably Bertrand. He's just because he's a bit odd. So I think that's the only way I can probably just. I would like to say Ivan, but I think he's cool, so I think that would be giving myself a bit too much credit. But because Bertrand is like, he's cool, but he's also just cool in the most grotesque way, and that's what I think. If anyone would ever call me cool, it would be because I'm weird. So yeah, Bertrand.
Oh, cool is just like, yeah, you're fun and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
I would have thought you would have gone for more of an Ivan because you're the author, you're the main character. But never mind.
Yeah.
Never mind.
It does though. When I write, it is all. It's when I write Ivan, it is the most natural in terms of dialogue. So, like, I find it very easy to just go on and on as Ivan, but more than I do with any other character. So, I think I'm in that sense, yeah. But like I said, I don't want to give myself too much credit because I think he's a cool character.
What was the hardest scene you had to write during this book, and why?
There was a couple that I was writing and I was thinking that's pretty brutal even for me in the stories. But there was a lot of, I think probably the final scene, and obviously I won't give too much away because I know a lot of people are currently reading it. Just because it's completely, there's a dialogue between Ivan and Elizabeth that is completely different to the rest of both books, where they're quite soft with each other. Even though they love each other, they don't show it in a normal way. So it was weird because I wanted to write it to be believable, but it's quite emotional. But I've obviously described the vampires as being completely emotionless, so I had to try and navigate that. So that one, yeah, I would say that one.
Who would you recommend this book for? Obviously, all books have the different recommendations, but who would you say or recommend this book for? Well, the series, I would say.
Yeah, I'd say, like I said, fans of like any kind of vampire fiction. My mum, for example, loves her favourites like the True Blood series, the book series, which I'd say is very different to mine. But she said that when she reads mine, this is a good example. It's like a new version of like a new way of looking into vampires, and it's like it's a completely different story. And it might sound like I'm giving myself a bit too much credit, but it's inspired by a lot, but I tried very hard not to copy it. So I think if you're fans of, even for people that are fans of Bram Stoker, it's like the writing style is a bit different, but it's just it's heavily inspired by 19th century, 20th century vampires. So I think anyone that's a fan of that kind of horror, or even just vampire books in general, I think they'd like it.
Would you say Bram Stoker is your main inspiration as an author, or do you have any of those in mind?
Yeah, I think Ruta Sepetys is probably my number one book for historical fiction. Books, I've read all of them, but I think Bram Stoker is, because it's not just his books, it leads to some, like, he managed to create this mania and hysteria around his books of vampires, even though it's just a book. Yeah. And that in itself created this huge culture of like Gothic, like, Romania and Transylvania and stuff. So yeah, I'd say he did, because it led to so much more that's even just the films that are inspired by him that inspired me as well. So yeah, I'd say Bram Stoker definitely for this series.
Thank you very much for your time, Sid.
Thank you.